That's good. All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala sayyidina anbiya wa mursaleen, nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. So last time we had started talking about the different ways that we would reconcile differences concerning a particular narrator. So if we are speaking about a narrator or a specific narrator, it's very important for us to arrive at the correct conclusion. And what are the steps that we have to take in order for us to arrive at those conclusions? And we had said that there are a bunch of ways, right? So we had mentioned, like here, this is just in reconciling, right? So when it came to application, which is the first one, which is actually the first step, we said that there were 9 different ways. But when it comes to reconciliation, there are about 6 different things that we need to look at in order to help us reconcile. Context, what context did he make that statement in? So he said, like, huwa adaf min al-fulan, that he's weaker than so-and-so. Does that mean that he's actually weak, right? That's not necessary. Broad terms. So broad terms, this is the one that we're going to spend a little bit of time with today, inshallah, and hopefully complete the rest of these. But when the scholars of hadith spoke, when the hadith critics spoke about a particular narrator, they didn't have specific levels in mind, and we're going to talk about why that is and how come that's an issue. Application, looking at how the imam applied his rulings. So sometimes we don't have statements about the imam, or sometimes the imam will say something, but then when we look in the application, he'll still, like for example, if we say that he's weak, and then we see in the application that he's actually sound, like he accepts those hadith. So that's a different way of understanding on how to extract a ruling and how to derive a ruling about a particular narrator. Rare uses. So sometimes an imam will use it out of its normal usage. This is why it's going to be considered a rare use. Specific uses, and we're going to talk about this one, but did particular imams have unique terminology? It's debatable, right? It's definitely debatable. We'll talk about it. And linguistic uses. Sometimes they didn't actually mean the terminological use or the scientific use. There was a specific or particular use that they meant that was in the linguistic meaning. So da'if, for example, this was a very broad term that was used classically. It's not necessary that they actually meant it the way that we use da'if today. It could mean that somebody who is weak, but it's still acceptable. So it would be like a lower grade of acceptability. These are different contexts, again, like, in different plans, different places, different students, different teachers, right? So we had talked about a lot of these things previously. These are, again, someone who narrates at this time or someone who doesn't narrate at that time. We had spoken a little about ijaza as well previously. And we had talked about the mukhtalit, right? So there are certain times in his life where, he would be considered accepted versus when he would not be. So, and then in comparison, and we had talked about, like, when it's used in a comparative sense, that's not necessarily a sign of strength or weakness. It's just a sign of comparison between two people. We had talked about tadlis, right? Tadlis is something that where an individual, he purposely omits an intermediary, and this is conditional, meaning that not every mudallis hadith would be, that every hadith from a mudallis would be rejected. They require further investigation. Broad terms. So these are some of the things that we had, that I wanted to spend a little bit more time on, inshallah, and something I wanted to talk about. So classical critics, they didn't have strict levels that were associated with some of the levels that we had spoken about that we have today. So today, like, there are a lot more levels, right? Today there are a lot more levels when you have people who look at hadith, and even when we talk about our own grading of a hadith, we don't have the broad strokes that they had before. So when we were in the Sahih Muslim class, we said that in general there are 2 types of hadith. What are they? No. Sahih and Saqim, that's it, right? Either they're accepted or rejected. And these are the 2 general broad categories that the scholars of hadith had put in place. So does it make sense that they would have these 2 broad categories concerning narrations, and then narrators, they would have like a whole bunch? No, right? It would be broad the same way that it was broad in those particular categories. Later hadith scholars, they started introducing like more of these levels and started to like actually pick, what. So the thing is, like, it's difficult, right? And we'll talk about why these broad terms applied, and one of the reasons is that difficulty. So Imam al-Dhahabi, he mentions in his Mawqidha, we are in need of clarifying the terms used in Jarh wa Ta'deel and clarification of terms that appear as opposing. So sometimes you have terms that look like they're opposite to each other. So those especially require clarification, because sometimes they can have the same meaning or a similar meaning.
Why they use just like full faith and credit? Faith and credit are essentially the same thing.
In what sense?
Like even why do they use 2 words that are like similar?
So like Jayyid, Qawi, right? So how do you differentiate between that? Like which is Jayyid stronger? Is Qawi stronger? Is Hasan stronger, right? You know, so you have a lot of these relative terms that are indicative of different things. So you have things like strong, right? It's acceptable. He's truthful. Like, is that meant to use like a specific grade of that person? So if the person who's Qawi, he's level 7, and then the person who's Saduq is level 6.
You can't number.
Right. No, I'm saying like this is if you want to talk about that type of precision, is that possible? And the reason I use numbers is because it's a great way to kind of exaggerate precision, right? Why? Where else do we use numbers every time we want something to be precise? And if I don't have precision, like for example, there are a lot of terms that we use today. If I say, yeah, that place is really far, what does far mean? How many miles is far?
It's more than your convenience.
It's more than my, right? So it becomes subjective. And sometimes that subjectivity can come from place to place. So if I lived in a rural town, if I lived on a farm, versus if I lived in downtown, like downtown of any city.
7 blocks is far walking, right? But it's
Okay.
less than a mile.
All right. But for a person who lives on a farm,
Just a tractor can go 10
no,
miles.
I'm saying like an hour trip for them is like that's going into the neighborhood. So far can be subjective, how different people use it, but again, like it's that understanding of, all right, when I'm unable to show precision in something, what do I use? I use words to describe it. If I use words like short, tall, right, these are very subjective terms. And I'm not saying here that there is a level of subjectivity that definitely does apply, but to say that, oh, there's a level of precision that's here, I don't think that's even realistic or practical, honestly. So there are two major means that we show these categories. And what are they? The critic himself, he admits that, all right, this person is in this category or that person is that category. Or when he uses a term, that term shows that there's more than one level. So in general, if I said somebody is truthful and somebody's reliable, which one would you say is stronger? Huh? Truthful is stronger than reliable? Can someone be truthful and unreliable? Can somebody be reliable and untruthful? Do you see?
Even in the court, when you want to testify, you swear that what you're saying is true and correct.
That's fine, but that's witnessing. That has nothing to do. That has nothing to do with riwayah. You're talking about shahada.
Yeah, but it's
Shahada ghair.
words.
Shahada ghair.
It's an example.
Shahada ghair. Shahada is completely different, right? So shahada and riwayah, they are related. There are things that overlap, but they're actually very different. So, for example, the witnessing of a marriage, right? You need 2 males to witness a marriage.
Yeah.
Like, can I have a woman come and witness?
I think not.
No, you can't, right? Islamically, you can't. Like, not because there's like any deficiency of the woman, but in hadith, do I need 2 women to narrate a hadith before I accept it? No, not at all. Why? Because there's a difference between narrating and witnessing. So it's if we talk about like in general, and again, this is just a terminological use, and I'm saying something that we use every single day. If I say somebody is truthful and somebody is reliable, like, are there levels? Is there a general understanding of a level that we would take away from that, or no?
I mean,
Yes or no? Like, very simple. Is one higher or no?
yes.
Yeah, right. One is definitely higher than the other one. Which one would be higher? Truthful? Right. To me, reliable would be higher. Why? Because somebody who's reliable cannot be untruthful.
Aren't they 2 different categories?
No.
2 different.
They're within the same. Within the same sphere of acceptance.
Meaning
Yes,
like
sir.
someone can rely, meaning he's on time, he does his job,
Sure.
he can be a liar.
Yeah.
Huh.
What if I'm reliable in lying?
No, well, then you wouldn't be called. You wouldn't see this as a thing. In hadith literature, you wouldn't be considered.
I mean, that means these 2 categories.
Mhm. It's
It's
subjective.
the
It's
hadith
subjected to
category
hadith,
only.
right?
Yeah,
We're talking about hadith. So, within the scope of hadith, if a hadith scholar says that a person is reliable for what? Narrating. Yeah. So, is it possible somebody who's reliable in narrating is a liar?
Truthfulness is a category within reliability because
Can someone be truthful and make a lot of mistakes?
Yeah. Honest mistakes.
Would no, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Would he be reliable? No.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to hadith, narrative.
No, that's what I'm saying. We're talking about narrating, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to narrating, like,
Yeah.
it's very clear, right? So reliability would be higher than truthfulness. So, but is there like is there a specificity that's there? Like, do we know how far do we know how far apart they are or how close they are? Not really,
Not numerically.
right? Exactly. Like you can't get to that level of precision, but you do have a general idea. Like, okay, this is definitely better, right? How much better is it? It's a tough call. So after analysis, we would say that there are three general categories that the scholars of hadith had in mind. What would you say those are?
After analysis, three categories.
This is for a narrator.
So it was accepted.
Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely, right? He's an accepted narrator, meaning that if this person is in the chain with other accepted people, the hadith is
Accepted.
that's the first step to acceptability.
Zaif.
Okay, it would be
Mu'allaq.
right. Mu'allaq is a type of hadith. Right? It's not. We're not talking about a narrator. We're talking about narrators now. We're not talking about hadith.
That's the third one.
The third one is weakness taken out. Right? So these are three general categories, meaning that a person is accepted, or he is rejected, or he's in between. And what does in between mean? In between basically means like, okay, if someone similar or stronger to him also shares that report, there's a good chance that the report is accepted. And it's not, you know what I mean? So that's why these categories exist and why it makes sense to have these three general categories. Again, acceptance is a spectrum and it's very broad. Rejection is also broad, right? And then you also, in the middle, you also have a spectrum. So it's important to keep these things in mind.
There's a spectrum within a spectrum.
Yes, always. And why? Because acceptability is, right? So you have an entire, if we said, is there a spectrum for narrators? Yes, there is. Right? You have some narrators that are extremely reliable, and you have some narrators that fabricate. Right? That's a spectrum. Like, and if we start bifurcating, right? Like if we break these down into categories, amongst the acceptable narrators, you have, right? They can be anywhere in the middle, right? He can be on the lower end of the weaker end of the spectrum, or he can be on the higher end. And it's the same thing. Like if a person who has a type of weakness that can be strengthened, like so, for example, he has weak memory. Weak memory, we had talked about before, is a type of weakness that can be what?
Can you reject or accept?
Right, so he has a chance of what?
Being on the.
Right, being on the accepted side. But if a person has a problem in his adala, he's a liar. Yeah, okay, well, what if I have 50 narrators? They're all liars. That would be here. that would be here.
But there can be variation in the line.
But not for the muhaddithin, right? So for the muhaddithin, in the sense of acceptance, right? Not in the sense like, do you have some people who like lie to the point of fabricating? Yes. Do you have some people who lie not to the point of fabricating but still lie? Yes, right? Do you have some people who lie sometimes? Sure, right? You know, so that spectrum definitely exists. But all of these would be considered what? If I found this person in a chain,
Subspectrum.
they would be rejected. Right? They would be rejected. So, and most narrators will fall into one of these categories. Anything beyond this would just be a further definition of these. That's all. So even if you have, even the scholars that came later, all they did was they further defined these. And they created more levels within this. So suduq is truthful. We had spoken about this. We would say that suduq means, according to our general understanding, is it a higher level or lower level? Lower. Right. It's a secondary level. But the problem is that this, in general, that's how it's understood. But sometimes you have scholars using it to actually mean thiqa, trustworthy. So that can come across as a misconception. Fihi lin, he has some weakness. What can I understand from that?
What is that
Fihi lin is
fihi?
yeah, fihi lin. Yani suduq and fihi lin. He has some weakness. I can understand from this that the narrator is what? He's weak, right? But this only indicates a lighter type of weakness. And this can come into play when there is a difference of opinion concerning his level.
When there's a two scholars.
Yeah.
Different, that's when it comes.
Yes, absolutely. So now if I have some scholars that say like fihi lin, right, you know, he has some weakness, right? There's some weakness to him. But to what extent is it? Right?
Broad again.
You know what I mean? Like, so then when you start exploring, like, no, it's actually to a point where it affects his narrations. Like he makes so many mistakes that it's difficult. He can't differentiate between what is he's mistaken and what he's correct on, right? So this becomes this is sometimes it can reach the level of fahish al-ghalat, right? You know, where it's like an extreme form of mistakes.
This itself needs to be.
Yeah. I mean, these terms, the only reason I'm sharing them here is that these terms automatically sometimes we'll take them and we'll put a label, right? We'll put a label and thinking that we have the narrator figured out, but that's not always the case, right? It helps us put him into the general categories, right? It helps us put into the general categories. So the first one is less of a problem. Why? Because he's already in the
Same rough.
right. He's in the same rough, like he's in the accepted category anyway, right? Should saying that, if I know he's a little bit lesser, I might want to explore a little bit more. I might want to look for corroborating reports. But in general, we know that he's accepted. Versus weakness, because the problem with weakness now is how many categories? No. In general, remember we're still talking about the broad categories.
Weakness is two.
There's two. So
Weakness and weakness cannot.
yeah. So there's a chance that his narrations would be right. They would be accepted or rejected, right? So this second one is actually a little bit more problematic because now I'm gonna be like, okay, where on the spectrum does he actually fall?
It means that you gotta pay more
Yes,
attention on the X.
absolutely.
First one and the third one is obvious.
Yeah. It's the second one that requires a lot more investigation. So why were they so broad? Goal. Number one, it's more important to understand the general ruling. Even if they started going to that precision where they started putting numbers behind each of the narrators, does it matter? No, right? At this point, the idea was, okay, just get a general ruling because they're sorting a hadith, right? We had come to a point here when Jarh wa Ta'deel was established, is now they're sorting a hadith. Is this ascribable to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or not? So, would it make sense for them to go and be like super meticulous? No, it doesn't. Why? Because the goal was, okay, can we say, is this person trustworthy enough to ascribe it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or not? Right, and that's where basically what it boiled down to. The second reason, difficult. It's difficult, man. Like this is a subjective nature, and like we said, because of the spectrum within these, it's very difficult for anyone to put a label on anyone else, like on his level of trustworthiness or on his level of untrustworthiness, right?
Open his tolerance.
Right, yeah, you know, it's like you can't sit down, like, you know what I mean? Like, what are you gonna do? Like, start doing like brain scans, you know, to figure out? It's like, oh no, they didn't have like IQ tests, you know what I mean? Like it's like, right? Yeah, what are they called? How do you tell the truth? What are they called?
Yes or no.
Lie detector.
The lie detectors, yeah.
But the IQ, it doesn't even measure the intention
No,
behind it doesn't even measure.
That's fine. So, but IQ, for example, would be a measure of intelligence. It might give it might give an idea of his heft, for example.
It only gives
Whatever.
an idea of whether you think abstractly or not.
Okay.
So that's the IQ.
Mashi. And lack of resources. Finding out like super ultra precise information about someone is hard. It's not easy. You can find out general information about that person, and not just that. Like they're focused on one aspect, which is narrating.
Is he acceptable or not?
It's tough, man. It's tough, and especially when you're like, okay, how much time would you have to spend with every single narrator in order to get super precise? Like you'd waste all your time just with like a handful of narrators, and that wasn't the goal. That defeats the purpose of the goal, which is to gather as many narrations of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as possible and sift through them and try to take out the ones that are accepted and sahih. Application. So the best way to determine, like, and this is something that's really important, the best way. Just because scholars say something, just because the scholars say something about an individual, it's not fully indicative of where that scholar stands on that person, on that narrator. If I truly want to know the ruling on a particular narrator, the best way to do that is to look to this scholar's ruling on the hadith. A wonderful example of this is you have a scholar named Ibn Hibban. Ibn Hibban, he has a number of books, but the ones that he's most famous for is there's a book called Al-Thiqat. And thiqa means what? Trustworthy, right? Thiqa means trustworthy. And he has this book called Thiqat. So if I look at this book, I would automatically assume what? That all the narrators in here are what? Are trustworthy. Right? Because the title says that. That's not the case. That's not the case. So, but he has another book called Al-Mustadrak. He has another book called Mustadrak al-Sahihain. And in that, he says all the hadith that are in here are So if I find a narrator in here,
You change.
right? If I find a hadith in this book, that means that he thinks that all the narrators are what?
Accepted.
Are accepted. Versus his other book, well, there are some he doesn't have anything about, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why, inshallah. There are some issues. So sometimes you have multiple rulings concerning a particular narrator. So if an imam has multiple rulings on an individual, then he usually intends one. It's not common that they'll keep changing their mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? It's not common that you'll have a scholar constantly changing his mind about a particular narrator, right? Because the narrations, again, we're talking about an era where the narrations had been recorded, right? So there's not a lot of changing that's going on. There's still a lot of stability. I'm sorry? Yeah, it's like, oh, I was actually wrong about this guy. It's usually a lot of stability within this. So you don't have that a lot. So if you find opposing terms, or if you have opposing statements about a particular individual, he usually intends one, right? He usually intends one. So what do? That would require a little bit of analysis and be like, okay, well, is there a way I can kind of twist the meaning to agree one way or the other, whether it be accepted or rejected? Descriptions. So when they're mentioned together, then they are not meant to be opposing, meaning that we have certain situations where you have scholars who will be like, huwa alyan min, he's weaker than so-and-so. Or huwa ad'af min, he's weaker than so-and-so. Or you would say that huwa asah min, or ahfaz min, that he is more correct, or he is more precise than so-and-so. When you have those comparisons, what is the purpose of the comparison?
Stating that person, let's say, letting you know that he's accurate, or letting you know he's.
Maybe giving you a range of where he is.
Giving me a range of where he is. That's exactly what it is, right? He's giving me a range of where this individual falls into, right? Because does it tell me if he thinks he is sound or rejected, accepted or rejected?
It depends where he stands.
Right. So the thing is, like, if you have that comparison, like for example, if I shared with you two narrators, and I had Ahmed is a sound narrator and I had Khalid is a weak narrator, and I say Khalid is weaker than Ahmed.
Yes.
Does that mean Ahmed is weak?
No.
No, it doesn't.
It can slightly maybe weaker.
Right. So sometimes it can be slighter, and not just that. You have many of the muhaddithin. They were asked about different scholars. They're like, hey, what do you think about so and so? And then he will say, huwa ahabba ilayya, that his narrations are more beloved to me than so and so's narrations. Does that mean he likes either of them? I want you to. So like a pizza, for example. Give me two toppings you don't like. Pineapple, number one, and the second. Tomatoes. Oh, wow. Okay. It's kind of interesting. So, which one is worse, the tomatoes or the pineapples? Pineapples. Allahu Akbar. We have ijma' on this issue. But we like what? We like neither of them. And if I said to you, man, like tomatoes are more beloved to me than pineapples, does that mean that I like tomatoes? No, not at all, right?
Well,
It can both be rejected.
Let's say someone who's 6'7",
Uh-huh.
and someone who's 6'5", and I say the 6'5" is shorter. Does
Yes.
that mean he's short?
Why is that a better example?
It gives you the number, right?
I think it's a good example.
Yeah.
I don't know. Better is so like his example is better than mine,
Yeah.
right?
Does that mean it's bad?
Does it mean it's a bad example,
Right.
right? So these are all good ways to express these ideas. But again, it helps apply a level of precision of understanding that individuals or those particular people's range versus an actual ruling on that particular narrator. Comparison, and this is what we had talked about, right? Placing above or below, and his hadith. And the best way, we said, like, the best way is going back and actually looking at the rulings on those particular hadith, because it will give us an idea of what the actual end result is, right? Because the ruling on a hadith is basically the end result of that scholar's understanding of where that person stands. Any questions on this? No? Rare uses. So sometimes they're used in a metaphorical sense, and this only becomes clear when I spend a lot of time reading the critics, like hadith critics' works. I have to read a lot, and about different statements. I have to read a lot about different people. And when I read about those statements, when I read about those people, when I read about those contexts, when I read these comparisons, it helps give me an idea of how that scholar expressed himself or how he expressed his views on particular narrators. So this is something that actually requires quite a bit of time in understanding how to deal with these rare uses. And again, the problem with these is that they are what? Sometimes they can be confusing, and sometimes they're terms that it's like, I'll give you an example. I asked about this narrator, and Sufyan, he went like this.
Well, what does this mean?
Did you understand the problem?
Neutral?
No, I mean, it could be, this is part of the problem too, right? So sometimes we'll see some of these isharat, sometimes we'll see some of these gestures, and what are we going to do?
We don't know what the hell does that mean.
No, well, we might not know what it means, but what if we recognize it?
It might be something else.
It could mean something else. Because what am I doing? I'm applying my cultural ideas and knowledge on a particular gesture to something that happened like 1,000 years ago or 1,200 years ago. Does that make sense? No. Right. This is something that it actually happens very commonly. It's called back projection. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term. Yeah. Basically, what I do is like I look at history through my lens. Right. I look at history through my lens, and this happens like quite a bit. So like the big movement now, right? It's like, oh, the founding fathers and all the people through history, they're all evil because they all owned slaves. Okay. Does it make sense for us as we move forward in history and as Western subjective morality changes to start taking the rules of that time and just dismiss everybody that preceded?
Because it was considered okay.
It was considered okay at the time, right? So if there are a group of people at a time who consider something okay, does it make sense to blame them for what they did? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that they're right? No, not necessarily, right? There's some atrocities and things that happen that were accepted by society, but does it make sense for us to expect certain people to step away from that? So for example, 50 years from now, what's happening today in terms of like, children being chemically castrated or, sex reassignment surgeries and things like that, 50 years from now, they'd be like, man, this was brutal. Like, no, I'm saying like this is just one example, right? Like this is brutal. Like they completely change. You know what I mean? Like they're having all these surgeries on these children, and they'll look back and they'll be like, all of the people who lived at that time or what?
Well, not all.
They're even not what?
A bunch of wolves.
I mean,
Come on.
but it's the same thing. If you have a few people, for example, who lived in the past
Yeah.
who are against a particular institution, you can't start lumping them in. Or if they took part in the institution. Like, so for example, John Hopkins is one of the most famous ones that does these sex reassignment surgeries. Like, if I worked at John Hopkins during the time where this happened, you know what I mean? Like, does that mean that person can be thrown under the bus? Right? It's not fair. It's important to kind of keep all of these things, like when we talk about like this subjective morality, to keep all of these things in mind and to make sure that we're not back projecting, right? That we're not actually looking.
You actually have to know
That's
that
You have to understand the culture.
people are culture.
Right, you have to understand the culture and the context. Like, and it's the same thing. What is the purpose of like reading a lot in Jarh wa Ta'deel? Right, I have to know the culture. Like, I need to know the culture of the muhaddithin. I need to know the culture of the scholars so I can understand what it was that they were saying and what they intended and what their goals were. And like, there's certain terms that I find strange. There's certain uses. So what is a good way for me to do that? So now if I have like 5 uses of Sufyan where he went like this, what do I do? What should I do?
Do you know what this actually means, or just?
I'm giving an example. But well, I have an idea.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. Huh?
If you actually have 5, then
Yeah.
and then you compare those 5,
Mhm.
if they're actually accepted,
Ahsant.
that means
Mumtaz.
okay, this means
Perfect.
And then if you see there's one accepted, one this, then that's already
Right. Then it's more confusing. Right. it just adds on top of the confusion. But that is the way to do it. So basically, I would gather all of the instances of this particular scholar of where he did that, and then the other thing I could do is I can look at other scholars and I can see what did they do the same thing, right? And or I can gather up all the instances where they did gestures. What is the problem with that?
Maybe not all of them meant the same.
Not all of them meant the same thing. Why? How is that possible? Like, they're all scholars of hadith. Why aren't
Maybe they didn't live the same.
they didn't live in the same time? They didn't live in the same place, right? Every place has different cultures. So like, there's a cultural expressions for certain things. So it's not always helpful to use other places or other statements as a gauge to help me understand one particular scholar. The best thing to do, like Ibrahim mentioned, I gather up all of the instances within that particular scholar. And then what can I do? I start looking at the application. So I'll be like, okay, now that I have all of these people, what am I going to do is these 5 narrators, I'm actually going to search for them in the Hadith Encyclopedia. I'm going to search for them, and I'm going to see what do the scholars say about these particular hadith. And if I find a theme, if I find a common theme, then now it helps me bring a ruling, and it helps me understand what it was that he meant by that particular gesture. And there are certain things that we do today. Like, so for example, it's like, hey, well, what do you think about this speaker? And I'm like, right, it's a gesture.
This means so-so.
That's right. It means so, but it means so-so too, to us, right? If somebody came 100 years from now, and they're like, yeah, and the sheikh shook his hand, he'd be like, what? Like meaning that he wanted to shake his hand and he thought he was a good person, right? You know what I mean? Like there are ways to understand it, without having that cultural context. Specific uses. So over here, Imam al-Dhahabi again, he says in Muqaddah. Inshallah, I really want to go over this at some point. But inshallah, I hope we get time to study it. It is more important to note that knowledge is only with complete perusal of the text. This is something that's called istiqra. Istiqra is where you have read everything or as much as possible in a particular science or a particular field or in a particular study. Why is that important? I'm sorry? It gives me knowledge, sure, that's great. Knowledge is wonderful, and I definitely get that. Like there's barakah and stuff like that. But why is it important for me to read as much or all of it?
So you can conclude the broadest range.
Okay. What is the benefit of me reading everything in a particular field? Okay, perspectives. Right. If I have an entire reading, I'll have a general idea, and not just that, I'm able to connect all of the links. Like for example, and this is just a very simple example. If I've memorized like 3 surahs from the Quran, this is very different than somebody who's memorized the entirety of it. The person who's memorized the entirety of it, what can he do that person who's only has 3 surahs can't? Huh? Right, pulling out references, sure. What else? Which one will have a better contextual understanding of verses? Right, the guy who memorized it. Because he'll be like, okay, well, actually, Allah says this here, and then he says it in a similar way here, and he says it in a similar way here, and he says it in a similar way here. There has to be something that connects them. Versus the person who has just 3 surahs, he'll only have one instance of it. In that one instance, there's no way that he can get context in the general idea, right, of the different discussions, or seeing the themes throughout that, right, or seeing how different scholars dealt with different things and the different understandings and the different perspectives behind that.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in the hadith science specifically, how many books do you have to have read, or how many hadith scholars do you have to have studied to be considered well-read in the field?
It depends on what you're specializing in, right? So within hadith sciences, there's different specialties. You can, if you go the studying the text route, so for example, somebody can specialize in just Sahih Bukhari. And what does that entail? That he's read all of the shuruhat, like all of the explanations of Sahih Bukhari, and if he, by extension, all of the hadith that are in Sahih Bukhari that are also in other books, that in those books have been explained, he can go to those books and start reading those explanations too. This is somebody who we could say is somebody who's versed in Sahih Bukhari. He's specialized in that. And we would say he's a hadith scholar. But if I went to that same person and I asked him about a particular narrator, he's only familiar with which narrators? The ones that are in Bukhari. But would he be a hadith scholar? Absolutely. So when it comes to this, it's like, okay, well, what did that scholar specialize in? Right? That's something that's really important. We live in an era now where there's kind of shortcuts. So, for example, in the Sahih Muslim class, we had a talk about one of the narrators, Abu Zubair, right? So Abu Zubair was a tabi'i. We said that he was mudallis, etc. So I was like, okay, well, I wanted to find out more about Abu Zubair. So what did I do? I went and I looked for a paper on someone who had written specifically and specialized in Abu Zubair. Right? So what did he do? He gathered up all of the instances in which Abu Zubair had narrated a hadith. He compiled them, he put them in one book, and he came to his conclusions. So, like, we have that benefit, right? So we live in that era where those things can definitely happen. In the past, right, there's a lot more memorization, right? There was a lot more reading. There was a lot more, there's a lot more critical analysis. It was a little bit different. Not to say that those things don't happen today, but as somebody who is studying hadith, is it important that I have the same type of memory as, like, Imam Bukhari did? Yes or no?
No.
No. Okay. So here, in living in this era, is it important for me as a student of hadith to have the same level or the same type of memory that Imam Bukhari did?
No.
No. Why?
So we have paper and everything.
Everything's recorded. It's in front of me. Like, what is the benefit of, like, memorization is what you had mentioned, right? The benefit of memorization today is what? If I went to?
Have it with you. I mean, not have it with you. I mean, like,
If I want to quote it,
record it.
right? It becomes easy. Like, if I'm preparing a lecture and I have a number of ayat and a number of hadith memorized, who will prepare that talk quicker? The one who has it memorized, or the one who has an idea, but he doesn't have it memorized? Right, the guy who memorized it. Why? Because he has those resources on tap, right? That's the benefit. Like, is it necessary that the quality of both of them will be the same? Is the person who memorized, will the quality of his product be better than the one who hadn't memorized? Not necessarily, right? It doesn't dictate quality, but it does dictate some speed, right? Because it helps significantly. But not just that, there's a level of understanding that goes into it. Just because I have more hadith memorized doesn't mean that I will use them appropriately, right? And sometimes we don't think along these terms, and and I don't mean to dismiss hifz. Like, I don't at all. I think it's something that's really important. I think it has its place, right? Even when we prepare talks, it's important to have those things memorized because they're a quick resource, right? It's quick to utilize them. But at the end of the day, there's a difference between what is recorded and my hifz. And what is that difference? My teacher actually told me this. So here, today, what is the big difference between my device or paper or the book or the program in my mind?
Your mind is quicker.
It can be, sure. I agree. But what else? That's not what I'm looking for, though.
Deeper understanding because you have it in your head.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
My hifz can betray me.
Not when you're alone.
Well, we're not there yet.
I mean, they approved the trial. So.
Well, they also approved the COVID vaccines. But anyway. So my hifz, it can actually, and my memory can actually deceive me. I might think that I have something memorized in a particular way, but it's what? It's actually wrong. And what's written in the paper, is that ever going to change? No. Right? Yeah. Right? Is it possible that I, as a human being, make a mistake in the way that I narrate a particular hadith, even though I'd memorized it? Are there people who have stronger memory than others? Yeah, absolutely. Those things. Right, those things, they happen. People do make mistakes, and that's completely understandable. Are there people who make less mistakes? Absolutely. I'm totally with that. But at the end of the day, there's a reason everything was recorded in ink. Because it's unchanged. This is why Umar radiallahu anh, this is why Abu Bakr, this is why Uthman, it was not enough for them to just pass the Quran verbally. It wasn't enough for them. So, like, some of the Qurra had died. There was a whole bunch of things that were happening, but there was a push for them to say, okay, no, this needs to be recorded. Right? This is something that needs to be recorded. And eventually with the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like, it had to be recorded. Right? This is something that became fundamental, something that's really important. And like, subhanAllah, like, I don't want to I'm not using the irony in the bad sense, but the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals is what? Iqra. Almost as if it's an indication that this ummah will be one that what? That reads. Even though most of the Arab were what? They're unlettered, right? They're ummiyin, right? Right? They're unlettered, right? They didn't know how to read. So it's important. It's important to make, like, these tools that we have today, they're just that, they're tools. And we have to make sure that we're utilizing them correctly. So specific uses, it's important to understand, like, sometimes this argument is made that they use this in a specific way, but when you actually look in the application, it's not the case. Sometimes they say this or they do this because they want to put the imam in a special position. And these imams, the thing is, they're already in special positions. We don't need to put them in ultra special, like ultra special positions. And we'll share some examples, inshallah. So over here, Imam Bukhari. So if they said sakata annu, right? So this is something that's really famous. If Imam Bukhari is silent on someone, then that means that this narrator is what? Right? He's a liar. He's rejected. Well, I mean, not a liar so much, but he's rejected. That's not always the case. Imam Bukhari actually utilizes some narrators that he did not speak about. So, and the thing is, with this, like with these terminologies, all I have to do is bring one example, yes, to oppose this. And if I bring one example, then it completely undermines that. And it means that Imam Bukhari, he was not any different than what? His peers. In how he utilized terminology or what he did or how he graded narrators.
Is it, since you opened the subject, is it true that he uses these, these silent because he did not want to backbite?
So the thing is, like, it's not backbiting, because the idea is, remember, these people, the muhaddithin, they're not talking about individuals, right? They're talking about the capability to narrate.
But what I'm trying to say is, at that time, he said, I'm not going to be questioned. I hope I'm not going to be questioned.
Yeah, yeah.
Allah,
Yeah, sure.
He used those particular instead.
And
those terms meant actually.
Yeah. No, and you have a number of scholars who talk about, like, they fear backbiting, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they still engaged in it, right? Imam Bukhari has a book of Jarh wa Ta'dil. We call it Tarikh al-Kabir, right? So where he actually wrote about different narrators. So if he saw it to be ghiba, then he would never have authored the book. Yes?
Yes, that makes sense.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The other issue with this is, like, if I'm spending a lot of my time as a scholar talking about people, it becomes very easy to what? My entire day is spending talking about people. Like, he's weak, he's like this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about, this guy, huh?
Easier to gossip.
Close to gossip. It's easier to what?
Make mistakes.
The thing that they're fearing. It's easier to backbite, right? Because I'm already talking about people, so slipping something in is like, and he's ugly, right? So it's easy to, why? Because I'm already talking, right? You know what I mean? Like, I'm already talking about people, so how easy is it to, like, kind of, because it's just like one, you know what I mean? It's like it's a slippery slope. It's just one step away before falling into that. And they would say these things to remind themselves, like, listen, this is that we're doing it min bab al-nasihah. We're doing this because we're advising the Muslims about the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is an amana, this is a trust, and I need to make sure I'm fulfilling my trust. And not just that, what if hadith scholars say, yani kana yakhtab an-nas, that he used to backbite people? Just imagine. If hadith scholars, they say he used to backbite people, then what would happen to that scholar? He would be rejected. They'd be like, no, he was an open sinner. He used to speak about the people. But that, right? But that didn't happen, and that wasn't the case. Why? Because they knew these same people, man. Like these. No, of course they try to stay on the safe side, because these same people. It's like you have narrations about some of these muhaddithin, man. It's like yeah, and he would be there before the muezzin even showed up. He would spend all night in prayer. Like, these are the same people, right? It's the same people. Like, is it possible that this person, like, who is at that level of wara, right? I'm not talking about, like, just regular Muslim. Like, that level of wara that's going to go around and he's going to spend his life talking about other people. Yani, hasha. Fihi nadar. This is another one I have some doubt. Again, it's not clear that any of these were actually intended. Like, that he means he's extremely weak. So. Again, Imam Bukhari, he's put on a pedestal, which he's deserving of. There's no doubt about that. But does it make sense to put him beyond where he actually is? Right? He's already on that ultra level, right? he's like one of the imams of the Muslimin. Does it make sense to be like, not only was he the imam, he was an ultra imam, right? No, it's not fair to him, right? It's not fair to him. It's not being academically honest. Right? And it's not fair when dealing with the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because we have to be just. Remember, this is a very important science. We're talking about bringing forth the statements of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Ma'in, another example, there's no issue with him, or he is nothing, right? So you have different, laysa bi shay, right? When he says he is nothing. These are all just different ways of expressing like either a light weakness or otherwise. Again, not very different from their peers. More examples. Abi Hatim. Abi Hatim is actually considered mutashaddid. We'll talk about what that means and like how some of there are natural inclinations that we all have as individuals, right? So some people they naturally incline toward harshness, right? And there are other people who naturally incline toward ease. Yes, right. This is just tabaya, right? These are natures of people that they have, or what do you call them? Not natures. They're characters. What is it? The holistic people. What do they call the?
I don't know.
Yeah. No, when you categorize people, what are they called? Natures? Are they called natures or? There's a term.
What, like the character of people?
Maybe no, I don't know if that's a disposition. Maybe something like disposition is a good way of expressing it. But basically, people have different dispositions. You know, there are some people who are more risk prone. There are some people who are risk averse, right? There are people who are more conservative. No, disposition is good, right? Yeah. So like, there are people who are more conservative. There are people who tend to be more liberal, right? Does it mean they're right or wrong? No, right? That's not what's intended at all. And again, these are just different examples that he mentions and he brings here. Ahmed ibn Hanbal, Munkar al-Hadith, he actually means that it's Munkar and it's rejected. It doesn't mean that they're unique. You have Bardiji, Imam Bazzar, Nasa'i. Again, these are all Hadith critics. Ibn Adi here. يعني أرجو أن لا يعني أرجو أن يكون لا بأس به. Right. I hope that he has no issue. Again, these are all just examples of this. Linguistic uses, kadaba. Right, kadaba, we know it to mean lie, but it actually means mistaken, right, linguistically. So is it possible that you have a hadith scholar using it in that way? Yes, absolutely. Is it the...
kadaba or kazzaba?
Kadaba. Yeah, so over here, munkar and shaitan, right, it could mean that his memory is amazing. Saduq can mean foolish or changing, even though we know Saduq to be trustworthy. Honest.
Oh, so he believes anything he hears is what they mean.
It's like naive. And similar to that, we have statements that are clarified when used concerning a narrator and as accepted, weak, a suspension of judgment, or utilizing his narrations even though he has some weakness. And again, these are the different levels that Imam al-Dhahabi talks about in his Muqtada. So if I've gone through all these steps, right? So we've gone through these 6 steps trying to reconcile some of that. If I cannot reconcile, then I would do this. I'm at this stage where now it is irreconcilable. And what do I do here? At that point, is it possible that the Imam made an unjust statement? Is it possible that he made jarh, or he disparaged someone who's not deserving of it, or he praised someone who's not deserving of it? Yes, that possibility exists. Inshallah, we're going to spend next week exploring what are some of the things I need to look for in order to help me determine if they're not. Wallahu a'lam, wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin, nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Any questions? No. We'll start the Tazkiyah class in about 10 minutes.